Thank you. Morning has turned to the afternoon, so good afternoon, everybody. Truly thank you, Team Business World Education, for having me here. I think it's very humbling to really stand in front of such a repository of knowledge and experience. And what can I really add after listening to all of you? However, I'm reminded a bit about the Chinese. Of course, I'm not referring to the virus, unfortunate virus that's going around, but the Chinese have a tendency to say that we live in interesting times. Now, this is really an anecdote which reflects a certain sense of chaos that constantly exists as we move on. That's what this line typically means. And I'm kind of reminded that somewhere, if you draw an analogy, I think the Indian education system is somewhere also living in very, very interesting times. I think we are progressing, but there is a certain niggle of chaos that continues to exist somewhere in the system. The ecosystem is very, very large. I think it's if you really combine the goods and services that define the Indian education system, it's almost close to a 25 lakh or a 30 lakh industry, 30 lakh crore industry, I'm sorry. So really, if you really look at it, it's so large, it's so wide, and yet so fragmented. And I see a lot of us operating in silos. And this is where I somewhere recollect the words of, Shri Anil Swarup, and especially in context of the theme that is meant for the inaugural session, which is creating a global edge in Indian education. Somewhere I don't quite agree that we need to really look for a global edge in Indian education. And this is when I recollect Mr. Swarup talking about how we should really not be following practices of Finland. Raghav, you would have heard him multiple times. Finland or England or Scotland, but I think we should just focus on what we can do for our homeland, because our own country has got so much to do in the education space that we should simply start benchmarking what we do within ourselves. And really, if you look at the homeland today, you will realize that it's a pretty dichotomic scenario. You see, on one hand, we've got close to 1.5 million schools. 25% of them are private schools. The enrollment ratio in private schools seem to be going at a much more alarming speed than the government schools. And these are all the numbers that you keep hearing about. You hear about how 62% of the students drop out before 10th standard. You hear about how let's say the enrollment ratio is about 75% plus in the 10th and just drops down to 52% as they get into the 11th. So in a way, the challenges are pretty large. I happen to, since we have now started dealing a lot with the government, I had a chance to go to the tribal schools somewhere in Maharashtra, and there are about close to 480 odd tribal schools, close to 2 lakh children studying there. Challenging situation. I think if you really look at what they're going through, they don't have a proper place to study. There are a lot of the kids who get killed by snake bites. So a lot of things happening on that front. On the other hand, there's a lot of good work happening. None of us really know about how a principal in a very interior district in Maharashtra has actually digitized their school by putting up solar panels and giving a tablet to every child. And this has been done through, just local funding, which they have taken from the parents who are economically not very strong. This gentleman got recognition for this, and soon many other districts of Maharashtra started to follow suit. So really, I think we are living in an ecosystem where there's so much happening, the goods and the bad. Some of the goods are not really known. I know about 8,000 schools in Andhra Pradesh who are actually being catered to by students of IIT, who have actually gone in and digitized those schools and started to completely change the way the learning outcomes happen in those places. In Mumbai, Balwadis and preschools have started gaining enrollments because of intervention from some foundations and NGOs, and they've started to give a better throughput to the BMC schools out there. So a lot is happening. So in such an environment, I think we have a lot of common objectives that as schools we might be wanting to do. But I think I would want to just simply give my personal wish list as follows. I believe that when a child reaches 14 years, he or she should be a confident child. I think he or she should be able to have no stage fright, should be able to talk confidently. He or she should be able to mingle into any ecosystem, should be able to adapt to any ecosystem. A child from the rural area should be able to work very seamlessly and interact with the ones in the urban areas. A child in the urban area should be able to interact and work very seamlessly in the rural areas. And I think somewhere, I think all these children should be able to apply their thought and articulate what's in their mind to people. Because you see, in the next 10 years, I think information is not going to be a challenge. We're going to be filled with information all around us. How to leverage that information, deploy that information, and talk and share what you want to say and articulate it well is, I think, what would be the need for the child in the next decade. And I think for this, probably my sense would be that 4 or 5 pillars should be very important. I think early child education is very, very critical. 85% of the brain seems to develop in the first 7 years, and I think there needs to be a lot of focus around that. Teaching as a profession needs to certainly get a big impetus. If you ask a youngster today, what would you like to become when you grow up, or what would you like to do as a job, I'm not sure many of them would say, I'd like to become a teacher. I think we need to reach that space. The parent outlook has to undergo a change. I think if you ask a parent, what would you like a child to do? How many of the parents would end up saying, I'd like my child to do whatever they want to do? I don't know if that is an answer that you keep hearing. You still have parents who want them to do X, Y, and Z. I think somewhere we need to expose our children to all the states of our country. I think part of the curriculum should be for them to know about every single state of ours and to also know about other countries in the world. I think that exposure levels are very, very important. And finally, I think vocational education in schools, I think while it is there, I think should be given a far better impetus. There is no doubt that all this cannot be done without technology. I think technology has to build scale. We can never do without it. It's fascinating to see how the edtech companies, the techies have started to interact with schools, academia, classrooms, how they started to understand what happens inside a classroom and work out products. However, my belief is that somewhere I think the edtech folks need to start working on a model which will start getting them to go wider and deeper into the hinterland of India. I think the accessibility is restricted to few in the urban and the tier 1 cities. So as I conclude, really, and this is all that I had to say, I think somewhere while we continue to live in interesting times, I think somewhere I would be having a wish list that some conference like this happens in Finland or Switzerland or some other place where the theme would be creating an Indian edge in our education there. And I think that is what could be a way that we should try to aspire as a group, and I hope we all come together to realize the dream. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.